back to note 4 of our podcast. Today, we actually have something a little bit different and exciting. I'm actually kind of excited because we're going to be talking about Nike and the brand and what it does so well, and kind of what can we learn from the brand, what's the history of it, and kind of just dive deep into how it became probably the biggest fashion, or I think it is the biggest fashion brand in the world. So, anything to add to that, Sid?
No, I think we should just start. I think for me at least, I found an interview that the I guess founder did, Phil Knight, with someone, and I kind of tracked through that interview and extracted some useful insights from that along with other research that I did. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Okay, awesome. I think I looked at that interview as well. And one thing that actually jumped straight off, straight out, and I guess we could just get started here, is the brand positioning that Nike has. And that's kind of the reason why it is so big. So I think maybe for a quick refresher on how it started, is Nike started in 1964 at Oregon. Bill Bowerman, along with Phil Knight. Phil Knight was one of the athletes that Bill Bowerman was coaching, and they needed a better running shoe and one that was optimized specifically for running performance. So they basically just designed a shoe, and it was pretty common apparently back then where people were just designing shoes with, some equipment that they had, and it wasn't really something that big companies were doing as often. And really, the prototypes that they made were sometimes even just better than some of the well-known brands. So yeah, they just made a few for their athletes, and um, Otis Davis laced them up and won the 1960 Olympics. So that kind of put Nike on the map, and that's kind of where it came through. So why I talk about brand positioning is the way that Nike has been able to put themselves as an elite running brand, where people associate Nike with being the best running shoe or the best one for performance in a way. Um, I guess another example I found interesting was like when you want the cheapest hamburger, where do you go? You go to McDonald's. What is the best cell phone in the world? iPhone. When you want the cheapest flights, you go to Spirit. When you want a shoe that performs the best, people think Nike immediately. So that's the way they've been able to position themselves, and that's kind of, I feel like, where that started, where they're able to put themselves in front of everybody else.
Yeah, I think one thing important about talking about the start of it, and especially you brought Bill Bowerman into the picture. Um, it's really important to recognize the state of the United States at this time and its connection with running. So one thing
Mm,
I found was that up until this time, jogging as a hobby was really just not a thing. And I bring this up to say that as much as business is the creators and who make it, it also has a huge deal to do with the timing of when you come into the market. And
right.
Bill Bowerman did something pretty cool in like the mid 1960s and late 1960s. He went to New Zealand and met up with a famous
Mm,
runner there. And in New Zealand, they're considered to be much better, like, well, they were considered to be much, like, very good runners at the time. And he came back to the United States and immediately released a book and a pamphlet talking about how running was good for people in a cardiovascular sense. Something that up until that point, jogging or running as a hobby just wasn't a thing. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, yes, Nike's great and they made a cool shoe and everything, but
yeah.
if the market wasn't ready to listen to it or the people weren't ready to create that demand in the market, it would never have happened. So I think that's a really good lesson to think about as well.
Yeah, and I think the lesson is really just knowing, like you said, just knowing your customer. I think Nike spent a lot of its time, especially in the early days, um, basically going to their customer bases and interviewing a lot of people. So it says that Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman used to go to a lot of track meets. They would talk to a lot of track athletes. They would ask them what they're missing. They would kind of basically be at these places where the athletes started recognizing them as people that they were looking to go to try to help them, if that makes sense. So at a certain point, it got to the um, it got to the level where people were going to Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman being like, "Oh, this is what's wrong with this shoe that you made." It's because they got in the habit of asking and being at these events so much, and that paid off
Yeah.
dividends in the future because Nike's made some mistakes as a brand, and they've been able to correct those through being in those communities and seeing what went wrong, and just being so connected to the community that they knew what the consumer needs basically, every decade that they're innovating, and they seem to always be ahead of it.
Yeah, and I think another thing to do that to talk about that is if we look at the people who started this brand, like Phil Knight was a ex-runner, Bill Bowerman's a running coach. A lot of the first salespeople that they employed were former runners, and that was like a big focus
Mm,
in their message because their goal was simply to create the actual best running shoe, not the coolest looking shoe or the one that would sell the most. They really wanted to create a performance shoe, and that was the initial push. And I think if we broaden the scope on that, what's the real messaging there is at the end of the day, the business you're trying to build actually has to work for someone, right? Like
right,
you can talk about it all you want, you can make it as cool as you want, but at the end of the day, it has to fulfill the need. And I think nowadays, with like all the marketing and social media that you can do, a lot of businesses, I feel like we still need to focus on the fact that like you have to focus on solving a need. And in their case,
right.
they were focused on solving the need of high performance running athletes.
Yeah, and Nike, people know Nike today to be like such a you know, wide array of clothes and whatnot because there's things in hockey to all the way to like mountain climbing that are Nike related. And while that might have happened today, like you mentioned, they specifically focus on solving one problem for one specific person, and that was how to run faster in elite shoes for elite runners. And through that recognition just carried them because once normal people see that elite runners are able to perform in these, they're able to get that feeling. Nike sells the feeling, and you could see that through their ads. They don't sell the product itself. They position themselves to be something that makes you a champion and makes you feel like a champion because they team up with so many elite athletes, and they've been the face of elite running and other elite sports for so long. So knowing their target customer from day one and really honing in on it, and what you were saying apparent with the sales members and everybody being a part of their brand, I even heard down to their sales pitches, down to their marketing, like down to every single part of their business was focused on the elite running space for a good while at the beginning, just because they wanted to hammer down that market and be known synonymous with elite running.
Yeah, I wonder though if you think it was so much of like a play, like they were focused on making that be their marketing focus, or do you think that's just like they were just hyper obsessed with that product and that's where it got them?
Yeah, so I was actually looking into that and wondering because there's a lot of people that branch out pretty quickly, and that's actually what Nike did. I think in the 1980s they had a dip in their earnings, and it's because they came out with their first lifestyle shoe. Um, when they came out with their first lifestyle shoe, they just weren't ready for that shift to go from running shoes into the lifestyle yet because they felt like they haven't fully dominated yet, and they saw a heavy decrease in sales immediately. Maybe that can be as evidence to show that maybe they weren't ready for that shift, and people knew them as this one certain brand. And once they started losing, once you come out with something quote unquote bad, if it's like a lifestyle shoe that doesn't fit your brand, the brand gets hurt more than the product. It's not just that the product's not selling; it's that now you're showing yourself as a brand that is venturing off and not being loyal to a certain space, maybe. But yeah,
Yeah, but I'm more so talking, I mean that was interesting, but I'm more so talking about
yeah,
like in the initial motivations, do you think these people who are early days of Nike were interested in creating the best shoe because it was the best shoe, or creating the best shoe
I see.
because it would sell the best?
I got you. Okay. I think they wanted to create the best shoe, but I think they knew deep down that there was a market for it because I mean, as a track coach, I would imagine his first goal is probably to win more track meets, to be, he's probably just so passionate, Bill Bowerman, about just track because he's been coaching all his life. But I think immediately once they saw the success that the brand had, it becomes a thing of how do we bring this to everybody and make it scale. So I think the initial motivations were
Hmm.
let's make the best track shoe. We want the athletes at Oregon to be the best. But quickly with the success, I mean, I don't think many people would turn down, millions of dollars immediately like that.
Yeah, but I think the point I'm trying to make with that is when you start a business or like you hear a bunch of people like,
Yeah.
I want to start this, I want to do that, it's oftentimes something that I don't feel that they're actually passionate about. I think
Mm,
that's partial reason why it never like takes off the ground. I mean, you have to
yeah.
see like these people were highly invested in elite running. I
Yeah.
mean, Bill Bowerman's entire life was based off of that. And so I think at the end of the day, the people that make great products, the reason they did so is very true to themselves. Like
Mm,
even if you think of, for me, for some reason, like Apple is like synonymous with Nike in my head, just from like the
mm,
clean cut marketing style to like just the level of excellence. And even though you think like the founders, it was inherently within them to make like a product like this. Like that was what they
yeah,
wanted to do. It's going to be really difficult for someone who's not inherently motivated to do something to actually give everything they have in it and build like a big company.
yeah. I was reading something about some of the greatest founders ever, and what I saw interesting was a lot of them. If you ask like the founders of Nike, Apple, and maybe some other companies, they or like the biggest creatives and the greatest creatives in a way, they don't make things to help people. They don't make things to like make money. They don't make things for a mission. Where like you assume all those three things are important to that person. It is, but a lot of people found that the greatest people make things for the sake of it actually existing, if that makes sense. Like the
Yeah,
existence of that certain idea is enough for them to make it, and in and of its own it has power. So like just for it to exist as a thing that started in their brain is their driving motivation. A lot of people will, maybe like, oh, it's to help millions and yeah, of course it is, but also just for the sake that it exists is all they want, and that's all they envision, something to like something that started in their head and just becomes a reality. So that's one of the most powerful things there can be, because it's almost driven by nobody. It's just driven by like your your like innate desire to make it a reality. I don't know. I heard it a few days ago and it stuck with me, but it's interesting for sure because I mean, what like the helping people got to me because I was like, oh, a lot of people make companies to help people, but then you zoom back and you're like, yes, I think people are driven by the fact that you can help someone, but how far can that actually go? And then when it comes down to it,
it can't. It
just
can't.
right. So like when it comes down to it, it's just the fact that you want it to exist and you're fulfilling that
Yeah.
desire within you, and then all these other things that come with it motivate you to keep going is beautiful. And I think it's like simply actually describes the greatest creatives there are.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point because I think oftentimes like nowadays I feel like oftentimes because everything is so within reach, we
Yeah,
think we can put energy into those things that are just because they're within reach and build something. And I don't think that's the case. Like I think you actually have to be in love with what you're trying to make.
definitely.
And I think we see that across the board, like from all these founders. So yeah, I think that's interesting. One
And
thing I wanted to, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to draw a tangent to something else, but go ahead. uh
Uh, so I think another thing to think about is I feel like this is also a point of differentiation between like Adidas and Puma, which were
mm,
the major brands at the time. Because at that time, the founders of Adidas and Puma, it was two brothers from like after World War II, and
okay.
they weren't elite runners. They weren't trying to
mm,
be elite runners. They found a market and they filled a business and did that. I think what Nike did was capture the idea that it is built by runners for runners concept. And I think that was something that was really powerful.
yeah, definitely. And the tangent I was going to draw to was where me and Sid are both big fans of Minted. So like I even see Marcus doing it now, and he read Phil Knight's book. I forgot what it was called. And he thought he said early on that affected him so much, and he spends a lot of time at these track meets, spends a lot of time like going with elite runners, and that ties into your point. Like they were able to build such a strong brand because of the founders themselves. Um, like
Right.
if we look at Marcus now, like it's the draw is he's an elite runner. He well, he's not elite in the sense that he's competing, but he's pretty dang fast, and that helps his brand. Because if you're selling something, like it's like a bar. Like, have you heard of the barber story? So if you go into a barber shop, there's two barber shops. One barber is bald, and the other barber has like an amazing haircut. Both of them you have to pay the same amount for a haircut. Who are you gonna trust? You know, who are you gonna immediately be
Right.
drawn to without knowing? Well, I mean, like, yeah, it might be a little harsh, but the person with the amazing haircut is probably gonna give you the better haircut, or
Sure, sure.
subconsciously you'll think that way. So it's the same thing with these brands. If you see an elite runner and with an elite background selling something that's gonna make you elite, it's so much easier to believe. So that is also once again the positioning coming through, and it probably shows up in a way like if they truly love the sport and have been running for so long, they're gonna put everything into it because that's truly them.
And they're gonna know the pain points of the actual product they're trying to create, especially when it's like a consumer product like that. You really need to know what's going on. You can't just
Yeah.
build whatever.
And like speaking the language is huge. Like if you're selling someone to something, if you can speak the language, it goes so much further. Um,
Right.
like someone who's in fitness can probably become a salesperson for like a fitness startup so much better than someone who's not. So simply that domain knowledge just makes you so much more attractive as a founder.
And talking about that, I think one thing I wanted to point out was the early marketing campaigns that Nike ran. And now we think of all the TV ads and stuff, but before that, obviously, was print. They would run taglines like "A racing shoe should be easy to forget." I feel like
Mm,
nowadays you wouldn't see these same marketing taglines because that seems, when I first read it, I was like, oh, like it seems like it's inherently putting down a shoe. Like nowadays, when you wear a shoe, you want it to stand out, you want people to notice it. But then you have to see they're not worried about the shoe. At that time, they weren't worried about the shoe as like a fashion statement. They were literally
right.
worried like, okay, how do we make shoes the least pain point possible from a weight perspective for elite running? And they have another tagline, run around naked, kinda. Like you can
Mm,
see like their marketing was not to create like make themselves look good. It was really just to be like hit home a pain point for the customer.
yeah, exactly. Just really because that I mean that catches your attention like immediately. If you see run
Yeah.
around naked, like kinda, that's yeah. And what do you call it? They actually ran a few campaigns and they were pretty bold, like you were saying back then, and um they ran into a few trouble with like marketing for women. Uh, just some, I think there was some misogynistic something going on. Um, I didn't dig too deep, but what they did immediately to like mend that relationship with their women audience and customers were they joined a lot of focus groups and they like doubled down on the fact that they wanted to learn the women's like reasons for running. And Phil Knight has said in an interview that the motivation that they found between women and men are actually vastly different for exercise and whatnot. So they didn't spend enough time studying their like the women as a customer to their shoes, and they paid for that later on. And he says, we spent that time and we kind of fixed it and it's paid dividends again. So I think he continually like, brings the point home that you have to continue to just really learn your customer, and it's just allowed them to be, you know, someone that or like a brand that feels like it's synonymous with like community and people that listen, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
because I feel like Nike's always been there in terms of fashion.
So then interestingly to diverge a little bit, um, why haven't we talked to customers or like the people that potentially would view us as much? I feel like we've adopted the mindset of we're gonna just create what we want and that's what it's gonna
Yeah,
be and we'll find our audience versus let's talk to people and figure out what people want. And I'm wondering why are we doing something different and what is our reasoning?
yeah, yeah. Honestly, I think that's a good idea. I just think it's maybe like maybe it's a little bit arrogant to think that people are gonna like not buy but follow you regardless. Um, I mean, I don't know. I think there's also a general belief in the sense that there's like a niche for everybody. So if you're able to create and be yourself, there might be enough of you that allows people to be attracted, and that causes an audience to build around you. I think when we do end up getting into the point where we have to actually sell things, or if we do end up selling things, how whatever that might look like, we have to do that research and kind of know the people. But I think you're right. Like even just learning what people want now immediately could kind of give us a sense of what content we should be making and what people want to see. As long as that doesn't drive us from really what we want to do and not just do it for like the clicks or for the money or whatnot.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be useful to have conversations with more people who we would like we should just take guesses of like, oh, this person might be someone that we think could like our page. So then we should just
Right.
talk to them and say like, hey, what's those kinds of things that would
Yeah.
interest them and go from there.
Yeah, because like, where's the issue, right? Like, we want to circle our brand around curiosity and building community through learning things and kind of invoking that childlike sense of learning. And like, do people even want that? Like, is that something that people are missing? We know that that's something that we're missing, and we feel like people are missing. But, do people recognize that? Is there a real need for that? And if there isn't, do we have to do it anyway for people to realize that they're missing it? I'm not I feel like that's where I kind of come to grips. Like if everyone says, "Oh no, I don't think so," but then you're like, "Oh, you really believe that they are," and then you continue to do it, and people realize that it's something that they're missing. So, um, yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting to think about.
I mean, I guess there is a piece of like making your market, right? Like I feel like that's the classic like Apple thing to say is like, oh, make your market. Um,
Yeah,
but I think it's interesting to also make sure you're just having the conversations. They don't need to change the way you're doing things, but
yeah,
they can give you a good perspective.
definitely. Um, awesome. So I guess a another topic or thing I wanted to go into that I found really interesting was I think everyone remembers when Nike signed Jordan and they were able to get the Jordan brand. So funny enough, apparently Air Jordan had like 2 great years and then it fell on its face. And what was happening is that people were associating Air Jordan with being just really good at basketball. And that was good for like a good portion of the population. Like, I want to be like Mike, all that stuff that came out during that period. But a good portion felt like they didn't belong in that shoe was because they didn't play basketball or didn't associate with Jordan as much. So 2 segments came out of Air Jordan, which was like the Air Force Ones Jordan, and then the um, Flight, which was represented by Scottie Pippen, and then the Force was represented by David Robinson, Charles Barkley. And the Force shoes are more aggressive for the muscular styles of David Robinson, Charles Barkley, and then the Flight shoes were more flexible and lighter in weight. And what ended up happening was those 3 brands became the top 3 basketball brands. And I didn't even know this, but creating that for a subset of people that they didn't even feel or at first they didn't even realize that existed, and then pivoting so fast to be able to create that for the customer. Once again, I feel like the more and more I go through the examples of Nike, it's just they just know their customers so well. And then when things go wrong, they double down and be like, "Oh, we don't know the customer, so let's get to know the customer more."
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
go ahead. Yeah,
I think they just think on their feet. From like what I'm seeing, like also you'll see the years that change. It'll be
yeah,
like 19 blah 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 made a mistake. Then next year did insane amount of market research and made something happen. And I think that's
yeah,
the idea of like they're not and I think this is an important lesson for everyone is they're not afraid to recognize the mistake and they're not too scared to take the action to fix it the next day, it seems like.
right. Right, because they probably spent hours and years into knowing their customer, and then when it falls flat, they're like, "Oh, we know the customer. It's not the customer. It's something else." But then they're like, "Oh no, we just didn't do a good enough job of knowing the customer, so then we have to go back and do it." So it's really just being honestly humble about their approach and
Yeah,
continually
I
being
think
like,
that's what it
"Oh,
is.
we messed up," and then they just give the customer what they want year in and year out. So definitely things to learn because if I was like I put myself in their point of view. If I did something for so long and it's worked so many years by like for so many years and then it doesn't work now, I'm like, oh, it's not this that didn't work, it's something else. But um, yeah, it is them. I feel like just honing in
I
on the
think
customer. Yeah,
it's a good lesson too for like life is like if you're trying to do anything, it doesn't have to be starting a business or anything like that. If you make a mistake or you see something not working, I mean, just I guess the lesson is to just pivot and just make a little change, a little lesson that you learn and move on.
yeah. The reassessing part is huge. A lot of times
Yeah.
people will like I think the internal locus of control thing is huge too. Like the more that you feel like
What
you
is that?
can say, like just basically blaming yourself for things that are going wrong. So let's say like a really bad situation happens, and it's really if an outsider was supposed to look at it, they'd probably be like, "Oh, it's not your fault." But the more you can tell yourself, "Oh, it is my fault," you're so empowered to the point where you could be like, "Oh, I could have done something different to help the situation." Because if you just say, "Oh, it's probably their fault," you feel a sense of powerlessness in that situation. You'd be like, "Oh, there's actually nothing I could have done." It's not that maybe they're not at fault; they might be, but you should be telling yourself that you are, so that you could do something better to fix it in the future, if that makes sense. Um,
But how do you draw the line between that and like getting too stuck in your losses? Like I feel like people often struggle with like if you the reason people don't assign blame every time is because they don't want to get too down on themselves and then not end up doing anything. So how do you combat that, you think?
Yeah, I used to think like that was the similar rebuttal that was in my head, but I thought about it in the sense that okay, so let's say, oh, you say, oh, it's not my fault this time. What are you gonna do now? Like, where's your context to improve that situation? Because you can't tell me in any situation you're doing the best you can. Um,
Mm.
it's also you have to recognize that it's a tool. Like, it's not a state of mind. It's a tool to help you. So you can't tell yourself it's my fault and then really internalize it and be like, oh yeah, like I did so wrong. I did like this is completely my fault. I'm such a bad person. The tool is if you can tell yourself, oh, I messed up here or it's my fault, your mind immediately goes to what did I do wrong and what can I do to improve it? And that just becomes a point
I
of
think,
self improvement. So yeah.
yeah, I think also the cliche thing obviously is like you will make mistakes thing, but also like if you see this Nike kind of experiment, it seems like they kind of throw a dart at some best guess location, and then they go and check if it hits. If it hits, they learn something. If it doesn't hit, they just pick the dart back up and look at a different direction and then throw it there and see if that hits. And I think the expectation, the important reason way people don't feel bad about themselves is if you understand that this is the game you're playing. The game is not to hit the bullseye, and if you don't hit the bullseye, you're like you failed.
Yeah,
It's to try hit it. If you don't hit it, go to the next one. Try to hit it, go to the next one. And I think that iterative process, like if we can just internalize that, it would we would be so much more powerful. Like I feel like.
exactly. Yeah. It's just like the example of like the mouse and the cheese that we had in our last newsletter. Like any direction is better than no direction. So just going somewhere and then just self correcting each way is because everyone's hiding behind the big thing. Like let's say you want to like start a company, everyone's waiting for the best time to do it, the best
The
people to
best
do it with,
idea.
the
Yeah.
best idea. So you're like hiding behind the big thing, which is starting a company, and not doing the small thing, which is just like emailing somebody that you've wanted to always email, or um,
Yeah.
posting something online. Like you're hiding behind the big thing because it's just so much easier to do so, but not doing the little things and going somewhere and then self correcting
Yeah.
along the way. So um,
I mean, dude,
definitely something to learn.
even this Nike thing. At the beginning, Phil Knight didn't even start Nike. He started Blue Ribbon Company or
Yeah,
Blue Ribbon Athletics or whatever, which is all
right.
he did was take a Japanese brand, all his shoes there, and tried to resell them in America. And he got distribution rights for it. And he kind of like cheated his way there, though. I mean, he got like he like lied about how big his company was and everything, but he made it
Mm,
work. He made profits, and then for whatever reason, the Japanese company seemed to like try to undercut him, and he was like, "Screw it, I'm just gonna make my own shoe." Like, think about it. If he had just sat there, waited, you may not have even seen a company like Nike. Like,
right.
I think the another key takeaway is to just take action. Some action
Yeah.
is better than nothing.
Yeah, so 2 points immediately off that. Like, if he waited for the right time to start Nike, he would have never had the experience of running a distribution center, having those,
Right.
off like sorry, international connections, like how to deal with those, connections and whatnot. And then maybe Nike would have never gone somewhere because he didn't take action. He didn't hide behind the big thing, or sorry, he was hiding behind the big thing, um, and maybe that's kind of where that whole slogan of "Just Do It" comes from because they were able to just continually like take action. Like if there's actually one quote that could make you do anything in life, it is that quote. Like there's nothing else in taking action. It trumps everything. Like regardless of how motivated you may be, regardless of how much, you know, how awesome you think you are, if you're not taking action, like nothing's happening. And I think I've had to learn that the hard way. Like as inspirational people, there might be inspirational people around you. You might be listening to inspiration, but if you're not doing anything with it, you're just as successful as the person next to you that has also done nothing. So, um, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a really good. It's so weird. I feel like I've never seen a brand that seems to identify with the founder so much. Like it just seems like the brand itself is just a reflection of Phil Knight himself. Like all his quotes and kind of his mindset with like
Mm,
a lot of the more spiritual side of him seems to just be like so ingrained into everything that Nike does.
yeah, and I think one awesome, I guess, like tangent is also he worked with Virgil Abloh, who is also synonymous with Off White, basically, and I think he gravitated towards brands that did that too, where the strong founders or the strong faces behind it were able to give like if you heard Virgil Abloh and Phil Knight were coming together, you don't even have to hear that Nike and Off White are coming together. You know, it's automatically become something crazy. Um, so
Mhm.
they were doing social media marketing almost before he was in a thing, if that makes sense. Like they were able to market themselves in their face so much easier, or to a degree that people do now, but to be able to do it without the internet back then is wild. And then to have Jordan attached to their Jordan brand, where the person itself was like a superstar, and that worked massively. To have the best basketball player with the best basketball shoe, continually they were like a people driven brand, and you can see it. Like their founders is what created the strong aura. They spent their time on their customers, and then it just paid dividends. Like the word Nike couldn't. I actually think if they named it something different, it wouldn't even matter. Um, did
Yeah, I don't think so.
the shoes if the shoes look different, I don't even know if it would have mattered. um, More and more you see that they just learned their customer, delivered results, and had huge insane faces behind all their products.
Yeah, I think that the real key takeaway is listen to the customer, being iterative in your design process, and then not being afraid to do something different and taking a risk. I think those are my major takeaways from this kind of small amount of research that we did.
Right. And I looked up Adidas's slogan. I think it's something like impossible is nothing, which I don't even know if I heard before today. So
Yeah.
that's another
I
just
mean,
another
dude,
leg up.
even to like the now social media, like before this, I was looking, Nike at some point had 300 Instagram followers, and at the same time, Adidas has 30 or something like that. It's like they're just not pushing the same way. I mean, for whatever reason.
Right. And there's one thing I wanted to bring up about the internet. So obviously, like sales blew up everywhere online once the internet came through, obviously. But Nike established their website before any other competitors. So in 1999 is when they established their website. 2000 was Foot Locker. 2006, 7 years later, was Adidas. Um,
Oh yeah, see, you gotta. That's crazy, actually.
yeah. So and then Nike had more than four times the amount of sales as Adidas in 2011. So getting that like leg up, and because I mean, even in 1999, people, obviously everyone thought the internet was going to be like a big thing, but there was probably skeptics. I don't know. I don't know much about that whole internet tech boom. I knew it was going to be I think everyone knew it was going to be the new thing, but um, maybe Nike was really, they saw the vision and clearly capitalized on it. So, um, yeah, they just were ahead. Like you can't be beat out by
Exactly.
7 years.
But again, I think it goes back to the same idea. You gotta take action. I mean, you hear a new thing coming up, you gotta try it. And now it's like, even if you think now, like with all these LLM stuff, like if a business isn't at least trying it, it's ridiculous. I mean, you should try.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if the
I
people that
mean,
are going to be
Nike still
left.
does that. I mean, right? Because Nike still tried the whole digital asset thing when the NFTs were getting big during COVID and stuff. Like they're continually trying. So, what were you saying?
Yeah, yeah. And I was wondering, I wonder what like the like what the reason companies will get big in the next 20, 30 years will be with AI. Like, is it their adoption of, like, what part of AI do you know, or do you feel like is going to be like the delta?
I think it's
It just
impossible to say. I think what it is right now is it's still so like infant where people are just trying different things out. I still think we
Yeah,
don't even understand the like what will happen. I think the main thing will be contextualizing the AI to all these different business cases. Right now, everyone's trying to go to AI, I feel like, and make it happen, but they're not letting AI find itself in their lane, if that makes sense.
right.
But it'll
Yeah, I
happen.
wonder
I
how
mean, I think it'll.
Nike can use AI. Like, I mean, obviously can, but like
I mean,
maybe
I think the next
AI
thing is
trackers in
putting AI
shoes or
in the
something. Yeah,
or just making the shoe morph based on like the ground or something, like based on the
yeah,
terrain. You could switch out the spikes to this, to that, to adding more foam based on how much pressure is coming. Like there's so many things you can do if you wanted to.
right. If you like define like a set trail, it tells you what to do. Um, I don't
Yeah,
know, within that trail or whatnot, with the terrain and you that you experience and whatnot. So it is
yeah. Like
crazy,
I
and
think
they also
there's
have
actually
a
a cool. sorry. I said that I think there's a cool mix
Yeah, go
that
ahead.
AR can have into like
Mm,
running and stuff like that. Like imagine while you're running and there's like some like AR thing that tells you like the gradient ascent, like you're about to go on, or like just things like that. Like gives you
true.
directions
Yeah.
on where to run, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if like someone reported something ahead, like maybe like a they saw an animal that you had to avoid or something.
Yeah, anything.
Um, maybe a car or something. But yeah, and they also have the Nike Training Club app, which I don't know any other company which has that, but a lot of people use it to run their first marathon or first half marathons, and they have legitimate programs detailed, and it's like on your
Yeah.
Apple Watch and everything. So just being, I think, in the face of every person like helps them, just that brand exposure. Because I always think about it, like, why are people paying so much money to like in podcasts or in newsletters? People pay so much money to just have their advertisement on, like, it didn't make sense to me. Just because there's an ad, does like, how does that convert? There's not even like a product that they're selling, it's just the name of that company. But more that you
It's the
realize that,
feel.
like,
It's the feel you get. It's the
yeah,
feel that you get. Like I'm a part of Nike. Nike's like excellence. Like to
right,
me, that Nike is equal to excellence, and you just kind of go along with that. You're buying into that. Like think about it, if you picked up like a new sport or something. Like what's the first thing you're gonna do? You want gear, right? You want to look good, feel good, play good. That whole concept. First thing you
right,
do, you go to Nike and like buy the new basketball shoe if you're just gonna get into rec basketball, or if you're getting into lifting, you're gonna look Nike's lifting shoes. Like you're just gonna get into like they just made it that feel like it's that it's almost like getting a Nike product like certifies you as being like an amateur athlete in that regard. And I think they took time to like really listen to what people are saying to make it so that it's an excellent performance shoe, but also reachable to the amateur. And I think that's the key.
yeah, exactly. It's like the difference between, like, let's say someone was selling you a workout program. It's the difference between uh, follow this program to get fit versus follow this program for six pack abs. Like the six pack abs, like gives you a feeling. Like they can market it specifically to a person that like
Yeah, exactly.
you're buying the feeling. Like I don't even know if I care that the Nike symbol is there. It looks cool and like that's what it is. But the fact that a Nike's on me makes me feel better. That I'm gonna like do
Right.
better.
Makes me feel more
Um,
legit. It makes me feel
yeah,
more like a legit athlete. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like a bias almost. Like a I forgot what it's called, but self-serving or
Yeah. And
confirming
I think
bias.
that again,
Confirm.
it only comes from the fact that like, they listened. They just listened.
Exactly. Um, yeah, I feel like that's a good amount of my research that we dove in. I
Yeah,
do wonder how the sports world is gonna like change though. I think we follow a good amount of running brands and like just things in that nature. Like I don't know before social media and everything, if there was running brands, like I don't think people were competing, and if they were, it wasn't exclusively running, but things like Minted, UVU, um, and like the spring of just a lot of run clubs across the nation, and um, there being like more niche brands. I wonder what the future is going to look like. I don't think these
I
big
think
companies get knocked off, but yeah,
I don't think they get knocked off, but I do definitely think that people have less big brand loyalty now. Like I think people
yeah,
because of social media, like I mean the reason big brands I feel like were so successful in the past was marketing was such a big dollar item. And only if you had a big backing and big funding could you really reach like the everyday
mm,
person through TVs or whatnot. But now in
yeah,
social media, e- the currency is not just money. You could do like really good videoing or really good messaging, and you could get
yeah,
there for free to the audience. So I could see a
yeah,
world where we have much more niche brands. Like maybe you won't see another Nike come from like a very niche, like grassroots like thing like UVU or Minted, but we'll
right,
see niche people take up a specific space. Like
mm,
maybe that just elite running would be one space. Like someone there could be a
yeah.
lot of players in that space that can have the same reach as Nike in the end.
Exactly. And once again, I think it goes back to like the founder part of it too. We're seeing all these founders and like them building in public, and it makes it so inspiring. Like you want to support them because they're the underdog, or you're seeing the process go through. And like I think if like a if a take like if the Nike CEO had a TikTok and he was just documenting like what they were doing to make new products or go in different spaces, and he was
Yeah,
just talking through it. Like I genuinely think there would be millions of people that are like enthralled by what's
yeah.
happening, and just like they would support the brand because there's like a face behind it immediately now. Um,
Yeah,
so
I think there's a level of like people are kind of pushing away from big brands in general because they want to be like
yeah,
closer to the people who are making it. Like now,
yeah,
like I don't know who you would point to in Nike and be like, oh, that's the person, that's like
right,
innovating and everything. But I think it would
exactly,
be cool for big brands to like expose that so we could people could get behind them and get inspired by them, like we do some of these like more
yeah,
smaller people, like smaller creators, because like again with all these smaller creators, like they almost seem within reach, right? Like you know their face,
yeah,
you know their
yep,
personality, you know their lifestyle, and you can connect with that. But now, like with Nike and stuff like that, like I feel like people with social media are longing to see that same connection with those brands. So I would not be surprised if soon we see that more like openness from big brands to kind of
mhm,
react to the times.
definitely. It's yeah, the whole social media thing. I mean, it obviously isolated a lot of people, and I think people are yearning for that sense of community again. And you see it now with social media and like run clubs. There's different meetups that happen across cities, and it's just about bringing and using social media to actually meet people in person. And that's happening in brands too. Like everyone's brand has a face on it. I think that's just the way that it succeeds now. And
Yeah.
the yeah, like it's awesome to see, honestly. Like I now when I buy things from like creators, I feel like a connection towards it deeper than I do when it's like a Nike or whatnot. And I feel like I bought it for like the right reason. You know, if anything, I help someone
Yeah.
that I really like and I look up to. So it's cool. I like
Yeah.
it. I think it's gonna be awesome in the next 10,
Yeah.
20 years to see what brands come out of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this is a good ending point for this one. It's a little quick one, but I think we learned a lot, so
Absolutely.
that's cool.
Yep. It was
All right.
enjoyable. I think the biggest thing for me was just, yeah, focus on the people, and it's worked for so many years and it continues to work now. The more you know your people and the more that you can show yourself and build genuinely and make something for the sake of making it and really know other driving reasons, is going to make the best things.
Yeah. All right. Note 4 out.
Absolutely. Keep building.